come up with a name for this, treating the Quran as or the Hadith as an equal partner, as it were, or even the majority partner of the Quran. I coined an expression for it. I'm calling it scriptural shirk. You see, so
Yes. I remember
I have
that.
even been, yeah, I have been
Hmm.
asked about that, and so yeah, because I feel that sometimes the traditional scholars, they are not willing to take some of them, their arguments to their logical conclusions. And in fact,
Hmm.
I have mentioned this in front of Prof. Kamali, and I recall, well, I think he agreed because he said something similar,
Hmm.
along those lines, you see. So,
Hmm.
of course, I think the reason the scholars don't want to sometimes shy away from taking their arguments to their logical conclusions, because those conclusions, those logical conclusions, it may seem too horrible to entertain, so so to speak, you
Yes.
see. So they
Yes.
pull back at the last moment so that they do not have to, let the the other shoe drop, or whatever is the expression,
Yes. Yes.
for when you say the punchline, or to finally come up with
Hmm.
a final
Of
point. So,
course.
but
Well,
I think we need to call a spade a spade.
of
We should
course.
in a nice way, of course, in a nicest way that we
Hmm.
can, because
Hmm.
after all, Allah does ask us to speak to them, quote unquote, in the best way possible, in Surah 16,
Hmm.
16 verse 125, which is a beautiful
Hmm.
verse, and I quoted it in one of my books. I put it as a sort of my first book, in fact. I put it as a
Hmm.
kind of a blurb at the beginning of the book. So yeah, so this is the process, and so we're all travelers, as it were. None of us has a monopoly on knowledge, but we all try
Hmm.
to contribute the best we can, and we build on other people's insights as well. And if someone comes along and corrects me, well, I will have to thank him for it. Or her. I mean, I cannot assume that I'm a know-it-all. I'm not. Only Allah knows it all, so to speak. So we need to constantly keep that in mind, to remain humble, so to speak. Yeah.
Of course. Of course. Well, then, I'm very happy to hear that. Please just send me a copy by email, and
Yeah, will
I'll
do.
find some place to put that.
Yeah, yeah.
Matter of fact, what I'll do is I'll attach it to our front page, where I have a little blurb there about you, and we'll just attach it there, and cite you for being so generous as to share this with us. I think it's very, very important that we continue this conversation when, if and when Allah allows us to do so, for as long as it's possible here. Um, uh, because there are so many things now coming to life, and you say horrible, I use the word shameful. I I I borrow that, admittedly, from Sheikh Imran Hussein. It was one of his favorite expressions over the years, and I hope he's doing well. I haven't been able to keep up with him these past few years. In any case, I call it shameful what our colleagues in academic Islam have done. Not all of them, of course, not all. But I want to ask you this question, and um, because we're going in that direction now with respect to Salat. But let me give an introductory remark or two, just for the
Of
sake of
course.
some of our listeners who aren't always, up to date with what we've discussed in the past. Um, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now, um, it's my understanding that in the early century, centuries, if you will, the first 150, 200 years of the post prophet world of Islam, after the prophet's demise, that people were confused about this thing we call the Qibla. You know, I've read archaeological reports by reputable scientists now. They've looked at the ruins in some of the masjids. That's another word we need to explore. But some of the masjids that remain with us, and these masjids were built in other places other than Medina or Mecca, okay, and that they don't share the same Qibla. As a matter of fact, some of them don't point to Mecca or Jerusalem. You see, so if I noticed that one of the things I noticed about Muslims when I first became a Muslim, and then I joined the academic world in Malaysia there for those years I was there, about 10 years altogether. Um, One of the things I noticed was that they didn't all agree, all right, as to how to pray. Okay, so some people would stand one way, another would stand another way, and there were some people who would separate the women more severely than from the men than others would. For example, the Salafi component in Malaysia was very strong, and their um, their observations in this regard were very very strict. Um, then I read some passages in the Quran that say that okay, they go into the masjid or they enter the masjid to purify themselves. But then I saw, well, that's in the Quran. If I, that's a loose translation, but never mind, never matter. That's what the Quran says. They enter into the masjid to purify themselves. But I noticed the Muslims were purifying themselves ritually before entering into the masjid. So it looks like there's a couple different layers of purification and how to approach it. And so I tried to talk about some of these observations I was making to people, and almost nobody wanted to discuss them in any detail. So I could only conclude that there was no consensus, you see, during those first 100, years or so. There was no established, institutionalized consensus. It had to be very, very loose rather than a rigid, strict form, and that this took place over a period of several generations with respect to the Qibla and the ritual approach to what many people call Salat or prayer. And I know there's several different words in the Arabic words that refer to, loosely refer to what we consider prayer or doa or salat or whatever the case might be. And I don't go into that because I language and I'm still having trouble with English, you see, and as a native speaker, and for me to, I'm one of those men that you give me another language and look, just give me enough words so that I can go into the market, find a loaf of bread, pay for it, and go home safely. You see, that's the extent of the amount of gifting I have for language. This is a scientific observation that people who understand linguistics, they realize this. They realize, for example, that women have a greater capacity for communication in other languages than men do. And so I'm one of those people. If I try to learn the Arabic, it just confuses me more, and I have enough confusion to contend with already. So I didn't make those efforts. So these words, they still. I'm talking to other people, dear brother, other academics like yourself, and other keen observers of language and linguistics and history, and they're all coming at me now and confirming in one way or another that some of the things which I suspected were correct. And not only that, they're giving me the details. Well, and some of the details of the incorrectness of the early scholars and even contemporary scholars is shameful, very shameful, because they're obvious. It's very obvious when you think about some of these things that our scholars, our academics, are just turning away. Now, from the truth of the matter here, they don't want to discuss it because it's embarrassing. Okay, and I don't. I'd rather be embarrassed now than on the day of judgment. If I've wrong about something, please correct me and make it very, very clear so I can repent and get on with my approach to Allah, so that He doesn't stop approaching me, as it were. So if you're doing something and you're doing it the wrong way, you're approaching prayer, approaching this thing called Salat, which is the ongoing maintenance of a relationship that has a two-way conduit. It's not, you're not just listening, you're actually having a conversation. That's what the word seems to indicate. um, if they're wrong about this and they're turning away, the Quran makes it very clear that there's woe to be paid for such a thing. I mean, the Quran, these are not my words. The Quran says, woe unto them who turn away. Woe unto them who change the words. Woe, woe, woe. And it specifically refers to the hereafter. Okay. Now, I'm not interested in waiting for the hereafter. Okay. There are a lot of people who just, they've accepted the fatalism and their circumstances, and you go to them for help or for wisdom. And what happens is that usually 9 times out of 10, the imam gives you some superlative statements about being patient and waiting for your reward. And it's usually in the hereafter. So I think the Muslims who changed the words and who changed this, that, or the next thing about the Sunnah of Allah compared to the Sunnah of the Prophet, and the Hadith of Allah, which is the Quran, compared to the Hadith of men, you see. I think that they did many of these things on purpose, and then over a period of time, it was just accepted, blindly accepted. Now, you can say, okay, well, we have a problem in Islam because of this blind acceptance, but this goes beyond the Taqlidism, if you will, of ISIS and other groups like that who want to go out and just murder somebody because their bias is more defendable than another bias, because they've got the guns or the knives or the power, the legal authority to perform capital punishment, or so they think. I think, dear brother, that amongst these people who were marginalized, the rationalists now during the first couple hundred years and afterwards, I think there must have been amongst them people who said, no, no, that's not the way. Okay. This is not a masjid. This is not the correct way to perform any kind of prayer. This is what the pagans did, or so and so did in Persia or wherever else the Salat came from. I mean, if you look at just the circumambulation of the Kaaba, that comes from ancient India. They used to start doing that, 10,000 years ago, more, even more, if you will, walking around a little rock that they called the Mother Goddess, the Great Mother, if you will. And over a period of time, that then became a goddess that represents Mother Earth, and then all the perversions that accompany that occurred. So this is in Islam. It's a major, major ritual act. And stoning the devil, where does that come from? I don't recall the prophet doing that, and I don't recall any of the other prophets doing such a thing in any of my um, comparative studies of the scripture, or the scriptures, or the parascriptural literature. So I'm wondering dear brother, who were these people who must have stood up and objected to what became the convention? Oh, you can't have the Qibla this way. It has to face Mecca now. So when did that come? Because it's my understanding that Qibla doesn't refer to a direction other than one's approach to Allah. You see, now I could be wrong about that. I don't think so. I've had discussion with several people, and I'm interested in your take, your understanding of what may or may not have happened factually, and maybe even you can add a surmise or two in there, because the evidence is. It may be circumstantial in some cases, but it's pretty clear. And good detectives can use the circumstantial evidence to find the real perpetrator, even if they can't convict them in a court of law. You see, they know who done it. So I'm interested to know who done it, why they done it. Forgive my English here, and um, how it came to be accepted as fact, as truth, when indeed anyone can look at the scripture and look at the Arabic and then look at the translations and say, oh, well, this is just wrong. How did they come up with this? You see. Now, I know we've gone through some of this before, but I'm particularly interested in Salat, the ritual prayer, because this is the Qibla is all part of that. So that's why I'm bringing that into the conversation here, just to demonstrate to most of our readers and most of our listeners and readers, all right, that most of them don't know this, that there was no agreement as to the Qibla in these early masjids, you know, and this is now established scientific archaeological fact. So if they didn't agree, was it because they're stupid, they were ignorant, or they were just renegades running off to establish their own little congregation? Uh, it's confusing. I say, well, most of our listeners don't know these things. But there's a lot they don't know. All right, they didn't know why. Many of my PhD students didn't know why Genghis Khan sent his sons to go destroy Baghdad. They had no idea about what the Caliph in Baghdad did, the Sultan in Baghdad did to his emissaries. They had no idea, you see. And this was on the advice of those who were supposed to be guided, the imams who were affiliated with the throne. These are the guys whispering in the king's ear, if you will, saying, well, that's just a heathen, off with his head. Let's get on with our life here, because we've got the real promised land now. Did they? Well, they may have had what people call the promised land, but they didn't understand the promise. They didn't understand how to keep it and how to manifest it so that Allah is glorified and that grace, the Rahim grace, continues to flow. You see, all of that was lost. Even Khaldun admits that, hey, they lost the esprit de corps. They lost what they call that, the siasia dunia, or this group feeling is gone. So if that happened, and it looks like it did happen, when did this ritual prayer come into vogue, if you will? When did it become the custom and the fashionable thing to do, to get all dressed up in your finery and go into the local temple and face the Qibla and then doing all this shoulder to shoulder bowing down? I know people are emotionally invested in it, you see, but there's so many buts here that are unanswered. So, with that having been said, it might be a little bit of a loosely knit opening statement, but what do you think happened to bring about the institutionalization of ritual salat, all right, as given to the Muslims today? Were there controversies early on? Were there actual battles either physical or mentally, verbally? Were there debates over this? I mean, how did it come to happen as best as you can surmise, dear brother, inshallah?
Yes, thank you, Brother Omar. That's quite a plate.
Mm.
Okay, I will try to tackle it. Before I do, let me just take a few seconds to do my customary.
Alhamdulillah, of course.
Yeah. So as I was listening to you, providing the introduction, I was thinking, I wonder if I can say, as Sherlock Holmes famously said, "It's elementary, my dear Watson," but I don't think I can in this case.
Yeah,
So,
that's.
yeah, I, I wonder how Holmes would approach this question.
Mhm.
I was an avid reader of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and read all the Sherlock Holmes stories. I know he was also very popular in the UK and what
Mhm.
have you. But anyway, so yeah, we need to be something like detectives and to detect what exactly went wrong, who done it, as you put
Please,
it,
please, yes,
and
who
who
done
is
it?
responsible for this mess that we have in a sense inherited from our predecessors. And once we and then of course related questions: how do we deal with this mess, and how do we straighten things back out, and how do we find our way back to the original pure Quranic Islam that the Prophet himself and his friends practiced at the beginning? Because I would like to once again emphasize that I believe that even the word sunnah has been misunderstood because it has been interpreted as meaning following the man-made books of hadith traditions like Bukhari, Tirmidhi, Sahih Muslim, and all that. But we need to remind ourselves, ask ourselves, did the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, ever follow any of those books? Of course, he didn't. So what did he follow? Well, he followed one book, which is the Book of Allah, and so that makes him, in a sense, the first Quranist. So this word Quranist should never ever be used in a derogatory sense because the Prophet is the first and outstanding exemplar of someone who followed the Book of Allah, and he did not follow any other books, and he didn't want to change it when people asked him to change it or bring a different Quran. He refused to do that. He said, I follow what I was asked, what was revealed to me, and what I am expected to follow. So I just like to emphasize that point once again. Now, in terms of the people who stood up against this, institutionalization of the namaz or the ritual prayer, I can mention Imam Ibn Hanbal, according to an article that I have just read, written by Shabir Ahmad, and you can find it online. I didn't include this particular article in my bibliography, but you can find it separately by doing a Google search. Consult, so to speak, Sheikh Google, he's a very useful Sheikh. But he will give you still need to use your discretion because Sheikh Google is so unbiased that he will serve you up with everything, all the good, bad, and even some of the ugly. So we need to be critical in our approach to what we find by doing a Google search. But according to Shabir Ahmad, who by the way has a translation of the Quran also, and it's I think a fairly decent translation. Edip Yüksel has included it in his 4 or 5 translations on his Quranics.org website. And Shabir Ahmad writes that, you see, one of the people who stood up against the institutionalization of the namaz or the ritual prayer was none other than Imam Ibn Hanbal, you see. Now, the traditional perspective is that Imam Ibn Hanbal was flogged because he refused to acknowledge during the time of the Mu'tazilites, the rationalists, that the Quran was created as the Mu'tazilites claimed. That view, according to Shabir Ahmad, was a minor concern. The reason why he was flogged, why Imam Ibn Hanbal was flogged, was because he objected, believe it or not, to the namaz becoming institutionalized. In other words, he objected to making the ritual prayer a centerpiece of the practice of Islam. Now, this is
He
quite,
did.
yeah. Well, that's what the claim is by Shabir Ahmad. So
Oh
this
my
kind
gosh.
of yeah, how do I put it? Maybe I can borrow a Canadian expression here, but this is a kind of a mind-blowing concept because the conventional understanding is that the reason why he was persecuted by the rationalists is because he didn't want to say that the Quran was created. So, is there any truth in this allegation that Imam Ibn Hanbal, who was, by the way, strongly anti-rationalistic, is there any truth to the claim that he actually was flogged because he objected to, the institutionalization of the ritual prayer known as namaz? Now, people who want to pursue this further can look up that article online on the Salat by Dr. Shabir Ahmad, and there are some other references, and there are some quotations from hadith books that support this claim, more or less, that some of the companions in later years were scratching their heads and asking themselves, what have these people done to the practice of Islam? They are doing things that we don't recall being done by the Prophet. Yeah, along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically the direction in which these hadith quotations point to. So now, another problem we have here is, the meaning of the word salat in itself. This has been a subject of much discussion, and I think we have discussed it here and elsewhere. It seems to me that the meaning of the word salah itself has not been properly articulated. It may have been misunderstood, and it may have even been misinterpreted. You see, because when you look at there's a verse, some verses in Surah Qiyamah 75, which where Allah says basically to the people who didn't do what was expected of them. Allah says, I quote. Wala sadaqa wala salla, walakin kasaba wa tawalla. Now, in English, that means he did not affirm the truth, and he didn't do salah. Okay, let me first leave that untranslated, and then the second line goes, walakin kasaba wa tawalla, but he lied and turned away. So now we have two opposites here, telling the truth and lying, and turning away and salah. Now, if tawalla means to turn away, what does the opposite of tawalla? What is the opposite of tawalla? What is the meaning of salah? If the meaning of tawalla is to turn away, then the meaning of salah is to turn to, you see. So the salah is a way of turning to Allah through His book, and moreover, you can say it is a way of reaching out to Allah, establishing a connection with Allah by reading His book and following His book. And also, other people render the meaning of salah as making a commitment. Akimus salat is rendered as they establish a commitment. They resolve to become Muslims, to follow the Book of Allah. And so these are some additional meanings of the word salah, which show that the word salah actually has a significantly broader meaning than that which is given to it in traditional Islam, or the Islam that we know today, which appears to reduce the meaning of salah mainly, if not exclusively, to ritual prayer known as namaz. Now, I fear that I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing a ritual prayer. It is certainly not prohibited to prostrate, bow down, and place your forehead on the ground. It is not anti-Islamic, but is it? Does Allah is Allah asking us to do that in the Quran? Well, it seems that if you read the Quran carefully, there is little evidence that we are being asked to do this. Even the word sujud, you see, which is interpreted as part of worship. We need to remain aware that Allah asked Iblis to do sujud to Adam, and he would never have asked Iblis to worship Adam. So yeah, I'd just like to emphasize that the meaning of everybody will readily agree that we are expected to do salah, but where the disagreement is what exactly does that mean? Does it mean mainly, if not exclusively, ritual prayer, or does it mean more than just ritual prayer, or does it even mean something other than ritual prayer, you see? So these questions should be answered. because it seems to me, at least from where I've been looking at the subject, is that what happened, what went wrong, so to speak, in the Ummah is that there was actually a kind of disconnect. The Ummah became disconnected from Allah and His book. So to become disconnected from Allah and His book is to do the exact opposite of Salat, right? To turn away. And how did the Ummah turn away from Allah and the book of Allah? Well, by turning to other books, the books of the man-made hadith. So they grabbed onto another rope. Allah has counseled us, warned us to hold on to the rope that He sent down, which is the Quran, the book of Allah. But some people were not happy with that. They let go of the other rope. They turned away, and they grabbed other ropes, the man-made books of traditions. So now this turning away, this represents a disconnect from reality, as it were, because after all, Allah is also reality, the ultimate reality, and the ultimate truth. So what we see here is a crisis in the Ummah, which stems basically from disconnecting from Allah and His book and the guidance and turning to other sources of guidance, which do not guide as well as the book of Allah, the human sources, and that was a very tragic error. So what we are witnessing, I think, in the history of Ummah is a kind of tragedy, yeah, because the book of Allah came down to help the people at the time and eventually the rest of the world to find the right path and to follow it. And for a while, the Ummah did do that, but then they began to stray. And what are the reasons for the straying, you see? So now I think politics has something to do with it. And one other alternative rendition that I have come across of why the Ummah adopted the ritual Salat, in particular the congregational prayer, the explanation was that the caliphs wanted to, as it were, militarize the Ummah and insisted on this congregational prayer because people lost their individuality when they stand in ranks and do everything together, just like soldiers on a battlefield. Yeah. So that's one to prepare to make them obedient and to obey the command of the leader without questioning. So that's another explanation. There's yet another explanation, and this is one that is given by Dr. Shabir Ahmad, who says that he thinks that the five ritual prayers actually came from Zoroastrianism, because there are quite a few significant parallels between, the prayer of the Zoroastrians and the prayer of the Muslims. So this has happened, according to him, partly under the influence of Salman Farsi, who was a Persian, and also under the influence of the mother of Harun al-Rashid, who was a Persian. The mother was a Persian lady. And according to Shabir Ahmad, she spent a lot of money, propagating this ritual prayer or namaz throughout the realm of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. So this argument states that the ritual salat has been adopted, borrowed or adapted from Zoroastrianism. So that is basically where so now are all these theories true? Well, I would prefer to say that for me, the jury is still out on that issue, but I'm just mentioning it to show that has been a fair bit of discussion on this, and quite a number of people, including the Quran-centric people, have questioned, whether the ritual prayer represents accurately the requirement to perform salat or not. I mean, they do not question that we have to do salat. It's clearly stated in the Quran. What the Quran-centric people question is whether they question the traditional meaning of the salat, which is the ritual prayer. Are the two the same, or is there a difference, you see? So I don't know whether that answers your question or how well it may or may not answer your question, but these are just some thoughts that come to mind when you ask me, what happened, who done it, and so on and so forth.
Well,
Well,
oh, we're getting some feedback here. Um, Let me rephrase this. All right. The Quran says to establish a salat. Okay, that's a given. There's no argument about that. What the discussion is, well, what kind of connection, how to establish this connection. And if I can paraphrase it and maybe just use a sort of an analogy here. Let's just say my son is getting ready to leave the house and go out into the world to seek his fortune. And he comes to me and he says, "Well, Dad, you got any last words, any advice?" And I'll say, maybe I say to him in this connection, "Well, when you take a job, establish obedience to your boss." Okay. Now, I know that's a big leap, but it's not a bad analogy because in order to establish obedience, you have to talk to the boss. And obedience always implies some sort of communication to a command, and the command can often be misunderstood, and so there's always an option to clarify the command. So in order to do that, you have to have a conversation with your boss. Okay, and this is a two-way street. Obedience is a one-way street. Okay, but the communication is two-way. So the connection is two-way. So if I tell my son to establish obedience to his boss, and let's just call that obid. Okay, you establish obid with your boss. I make him a new word here. And hey, this is easy enough to understand. It's very straightforward. It's not a big deal. But it seems that this has become a big deal, you see. So much so that people will separate from each other over it. You can't even have a discussion about it without it getting heated in some quarters. Okay, and the first thing that you're called is disobedient. You're unobed. Okay, so you lose your position. God's not going to talk to you. You got problems with the boss. So when when considering this, I have to say, okay, well, let's be a little bit Chaldean about this, if you will. There must have been conversations about this. There had to have been conversations all the way from the palace down to the local shisha bar. Okay. There had to be conversations. And there must be some sort of historical reference, references to these conversations. Now, I'm not talking about the differences between the madhab. Okay. No, no, I don't think that's in the Quran either. But, okay, before you get the madhab, we the madhabs sort of differ from each other over this major matter. It, and I say, well, it's both major and minor, if you will. It's major in the sense, well, we've got a command to do it, and then it becomes minor in the sense that, hey, well, if I want to talk to God, like a Native American chief does, throwing some tobacco and a little bit of smoke and to all four corners. And if you just want to sit down and look at your Qibla, that's fine. Okay. I have no problem with you doing that. And you should not have a problem with me doing my approach either. But the Ummah has killed each other over these matters. They chopped fingers off because it wasn't indicated they weren't using it in the right way. I mean, I suppose it's better to lose a finger than your head, but still, this is not the correct approach to sort of getting a handle on Allah's Sunnah. And so we've ignored Allah's Sunnah, which has always been a sort of a two-way communication. All right. And this is what guidance is all about. I mean, the Quran makes it very clear. If my servant approaches me, if he walks, I'm going to run. If he takes 3 steps, I'm going to take 10 towards him, because this is a two-way conversation. So there must have been at some point in time during the establishment of all these institutional variations of worship and prayer and Salat, where the convention was finally established. It's kind of like the Nicene Creed, in the Christian history. There came a time when Constantine called all the big shots together and say, okay, well, we're going to do it this way. And we got a consensus here. And then you have this other problem. You see, the Quran says, well, um, the majority's most often wrong. And yet we have the hadiths telling us you got to follow the majority. Ooh, how do you reconcile those things, brother? So, how was this reconciliation made? Not that it was made completely or even honestly, but there must have been some point in time where the convention was established and the differences were overlooked so that a reconciliation could occur. And maybe the reconciliation included the murder of those who didn't agree with you. Okay. But in any case, the things established, the institutions there. And this is what the Christians did with their Trinitarian constructs 4 centuries into the whole thing. They finally came together, had their synods, had their meeting, and then constantly said, this is the way it's going to be. And then he immediately abandons Rome and runs off into his own little private temples of idolatry, including, naming himself God in the great Alexandrian way. When did this occur? Was there a convention like this? Was when did the Islamic Nicene Creed come into being with respect to Salat and the Qibla and all this sort of thing? Because it certainly wasn't there to begin with.
Yeah, well, let me begin by noting that Al Azhar University teaches until this day that people who do not attend the congregational prayer have committed a capital offense and have to be killed. So there's no verse in the Quran which says that we have to kill people who don't attend the congregational prayer. This is a major invention of some of the ulama. I think it's mentioned in one of the 40 hadiths of Imam Nawawi. So they have enforced the namaz by pure sheer force. If I use a stronger, expression such as the one used by the late Dr. Muhammad Shahrur, I would say that they have reconciled these differences through what he calls, this he uses the term intellectual terrorism, forcing people to fall in line and to comply under the threat of death, basically. So, and they didn't do it only with the congregational prayer. Al Azhar University still teaches to this day that people who don't pay zakat also have committed a capital offense and therefore have to be killed also, following, so to speak, in the footsteps of Abu Bakr, who went to war against alleged people who were apostates because they refused to pay zakat. So now I would like to see the verse in the Quran which says that not paying the zakat is a capital offense. I don't believe there is such a verse. So this hadith was clearly a fabricated hadith designed to give political power to the people who wanted to enforce uniformity on the Ummah. And not just this hadith, but the other hadiths as well. So I consider these type of hadiths not just fabricated because they go against the Quran. And Taha Jabir al-Wani himself observed, and he's a Sunni scholar, by the way, that any hadith that contradicts the Quran has to be considered fabricated, therefore rejected unconditionally. So what I see in these developments in this generation of consensus, quote unquote, by force, which also goes against the teaching that there is no compulsion in religion. So these beliefs are completely un-Islamic, and I would even say they are anti-Islamic. So what we are witnessing here, I would say, is a rise of what I sometimes think of as a form of fascism. Some people have called it Islamofascism. I don't like to attach the word Islam in front of fascism because that is not my understanding of the Book of Allah. The Book of Allah, in many ways, is a very liberal document. Many people
Yes,
don't
yes.
realize this. The fact that Allah guarantees the freedom of religion by saying, La ikraha fi din, there's no compulsion in religion. Consider how that contrasts with Jean-Jacques Rousseau's famous dictum, I think in A Social Contract. He was the intellectual father of the French Revolution. When asked about, well, what about the people who don't want to become free? What do we do with them? Well, he had a very interesting reply, and very different, by the way, from what we hear in the Quran. He said, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the French philosopher of the French Revolution, said, well, I quote, if the people don't want to be free, they have to be forced to be free. End of quote. Now, can you believe this? That is fascism. And they're not what we read in the Quran. But it seems that some of the ulama and hadith collectors came up with hadiths and the rulings of the scholars that begin to introduce fascism into the deen. And it started quite early, of course. The Marwan, one of the caliphs, put to death the leader of the people who believed in freedom. His name was Mabad al-Juhani. This is described in a book called Islam and Science by a Pakistani scholar scientist. His name is Pervez Hoodboy, and you can find that book in that bibliography that I will be sending you shortly. It's an excellent book. I highly recommend it, and it's accessible online in PDF format. So what we are seeing, what went wrong in Islam is that fascism began to emerge its, head, rising as early as the 600s. And in the following century, not only believing in freedom or freedom of the will, and these people were known as the Qadarites. They were persecuted by the caliphs because the caliphs didn't like the idea that people had the freedom to act according to their conscience. In the following century, the ulama added another crime to the list of crimes which are not identified as crimes in the Quran, which is thinking. Thinking itself became a crime, a capital offense, in fact. And they refer to it as, in fact, they attach the word freedom to it. So both freedom and thinking together became a crime of free thinking. You were not allowed to think, and definitely not allowed to think freely. If you did that, you committed a capital offense and you had to be killed. And in fact, people were killed, as we have discussed before. Musa al-Hadi, who was the older brother of Harun al-Rashid, and I think the son of the third Abbasi Caliph al-Mahdi, murdered 5,000 philosophers, in 786, according to Suyuti, according to which reference was recalled by Jamaluddin al-Afghani in his debate with the French Orientalist Renan, and you can find this quotation in a book called Modernist Islam, edited by Charles Kurzman and published by Oxford University Press. So what we are seeing here with the enforcement of ritual prayer is basically an additional manifestation of some kind of fascism here, unfortunately. And this is not the true Islam that was, I think, practiced by the Prophet and that is revealed to us in the Book of Allah. We have to recall that Allah Ta'ala, He revealed Islam to the Prophet and to us. Can you show me a verse in the Quran where Allah mentions Sunni Islam? Can you show me a verse where Allah mentions Shia Islam or any other kind of Islam? The moment you add a predicate to the subject of Islam, if you add an adjective in front of it, like Shia or Sunni, you have already changed the subject. This is no longer Islam. This is a different kind of Islam. This is a sectarian Islam, you see. So we have, as a result of this, turning away from the Book of Allah, turning to the books of traditions, both Sunni and Shia, we had what followed was division of the Ummah, splintering of the Ummah. And of course, the splintering also had political manifestations. Yeah, we know there were 4 fitnas. In the first fitna alone, the Battle of Camel and the Battle of Siffin, 15,000 Sahaba died, right? And now there's a hadith according to which the Prophet allegedly said that any person who kills another a person in battle, they both go to hell, because even the person who survives has had the intention of, the person who died had the intention of killing the person who survived. So now if 15,000 people died, and if we assume that it took one person to kill each of the dead people. That means we have 30,000 candidates for the hellfire right here among the Sahaba. Now, how do you explain that? So are these the people that we are expected to follow? Are these the people that are considered to be the Ummatan Khairan, the best community? I'm sorry, but I have my reservations. Thank you.
This is the basis of a hadith. You just said this accusation of hellfire for the murder in battle. Okay.
Yes,
Yes,
it's a hadith,
yeah.
and you can find it. For example, you can Google it, or you can find it in the book of Dr. Omar Ramahi, a brilliant book called Islam. The Muslim's Greatest Challenge: Choosing Between Islam and Tradition, 2019, published by Black Palm Books. So he refers to it, but you can also Google it. Yes, there is such a hadith. Yeah.
I see. Well, that brings us to the end of our hour here. I would. Gosh, I'll get this feedback here. I don't know where that's coming from. Anyway, I would like for us to establish a open mic webinar with yourself and Brother Ramhi and maybe Instructor Bilal and one or two other people, maybe a 2 or 3 hour marathon, sometime over the next month or two. We are going through restructuring of our computer platform online, and that will be coming to an end soon, and so we can then establish get back into webinars like that. So I want to thank you again, brother, for this meeting and for helping us to understand what happened. Okay, this is going a long way towards establishing a pattern of turning away rather than turning to Allah, which is the true Qibla. So if this is done for socio-political reasons rather than and out of the fascist perspective, this is clearly not Islam. And this means that our majority stands in expectation of woe. If you were going to accept the Quranist position. That's what the Quran says. So I think we are doing well to warn our brothers and sisters by having these discussions. And I want to thank you. And may Allah reward you for assisting us in this effort, dear brother. And if you have anything else to say, we'll just close out. And otherwise,
no, I think that should be. I hope that we covered a few points.
Oh, we did. We did. So we'll meet again in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, and I'll keep you apprised of our webinar developments. Thank you very much, dear brother.
Most welcome.
Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.